and thank you for joining for today's reading. It's part 10 of The Great Taking. Please let me know in the chat if everything is coming through clearly. Today is an audio only broadcast. Let's see. What I'm going to do is check to see if we're coming through loud and clear. Check. Yep, looks like we are. Okay, so we're going to actually begin today by showing you a tweet of a recording or an interview that I guess a citizen journalist was interviewing two immigrants. We want to start out this discussion about, the Great Taking or this great financial reset. We want to start out by talking about the immigration conversation or the situation that a lot of people are covering. And I'm noticing that there seems to be some language coming out that's making me in particular feel very uncomfortable. And when I expressed this to JP, he was like, yeah, it makes me feel uncomfortable too. And so he's actually going to join me today for the first part of this recording, this audio only broadcast, to talk about his position on it as well, based on a New York Times morning email that we got on Wednesday. But before we do that, let's set the whole thing up by playing this interview that somebody gave, or that a conversation or a series of questions that I guess a citizen journalist asked a couple of immigrants, like a married couple and their child. Mm-hmm. So hopefully you'll be able to see the screen. Just give me 1 second while I pull it up, and I'm going to go ahead and play it, and then we're going to discuss his delivery. We're going to discuss their responses, and we're going to go on into some other things regarding immigration policy in the United States.
¿Cuánto tiempo han estado quedándose aquí en el Rojo Hotel?
Yo llegué de julio.
¿Cuántos meses es eso?
Como 7 meses.
¿Y han tenido que pagar alojamiento?
No, nada. No he pagado nada.
¿Es 100% gratis?
Sí.
¿Y le dan almuerzo, desayuno?
Sí, le dan cosas del niño, personales, nos dan pañales, lo que necesiten ellos.
¿Y ahí en el hotel hacen limpieza de las puertas?
Sí, hacen. Sí, todos los días hacen limpieza, cambian las sábanas, hacen aseo.
¿Todos los días hacen eso?
Sí, todos los días.
¿Han poder conseguir trabajo ustedes?
No. Yo no.
Si ustedes tuvieran un problema de medicina, ¿cómo podrían recibir ayuda con eso?
Bueno, con una tarjeta, la del seguro de Medicare.
Y la MetroPlus. Nosotros tenemos la MetroPlus y eso nos abarca el seguro que nosotros necesitamos para los niños y también nosotros nos beneficiamos de eso.
¿Se sintieron apoyados gracias a nuestro presidente Joe Biden?
Bueno, sí, porque si no estamos trabajando ni nada, él es el que nos está ayudando prácticamente.
Entonces, ¿quién está apoyándoles en todo eso? ¿Sería el gobierno?
Bueno, el gobierno. La verdad, el gobierno, pero no sé, en realidad no sé.
¿Y ustedes saben que los ciudadanos de Nueva York que están pagando por todo eso, cierto? Es su dinero, de los impuestos.
No sé.
¿Supieron eso?
Okay. So that was a very short discussion that a citizen journalist had with these two immigrants, and he was saying, do you work? And they said no. And how do you pay for your medical expenses? And they said the government pays it. Well, where do you live? Well, we live in a hotel. Does your hotel get cleaned? They said yes every day. So it seems a little bit, well, it's there to gin up some kind of anti-immigration response from the public.
Right.
So we want to address that.
So so some of the questions were there to provoke issues, like the question at the end was not necessary. I felt when Julie first played the video for me, I thought that's really, he didn't need to ask that. I'm not saying he shouldn't have, I'm saying he didn't need to. The other question about, the hotel room and the fact that they, had it cleaned was there to provoke people to going, they could get jobs at the hotel doing that same job, doing cleaning. Of course they could, but that's not the point, right? The whole point of this thing is something else. They're not here to work, okay? And we'll get into that in a minute. So what did you think?
Yeah. So the very last question he asked was, do you realize that New York taxpayers are paying for you to live this, this kind of life where you don't have to work, where you live in hotels, where you have a maid service, where you get free food, free medical care? And they were like, we didn't know that. Well, why would they? I mean, seriously, like the last sentence that he asked, or the last question he asked in the last portion of that very short discussion that we just played. So if you missed it, you're going to have to go back when we finish here and watch it. It wasn't necessary. I agree. Because that's a different kind of conversation. But I think if we focus on how the language around and the conversations around immigration and the policies and the financial policies. And I promise that I will get to the reading after we open up with this discussion about what seems to be at the forefront of everyone's conversations and everyone's concerns. Of course, this is highly politicized, what with the election coming up and everything. So, clearly Biden is trying to pander to, the voting population that might be sympathetic towards immigration policy, right? So,
well, I think that this is going to be a focus of the election.
Sure, of course.
But to illustrate like what I was saying before, like this is designed to provoke. The questions were, and so I'm not even sure what point of view this interviewer was coming from. He could have been.
He's just trying to gin up responses.
He could have been a liberal posing as a conservative,
of course. Yeah.
There's other, so you have to look out for this kind of stuff because there's stuff floating around on YouTube, on Facebook. My neighbor sent me a meme that said retirement plan, move to Mexico. Number 1, move to Mexico. 2, give up citizenship. 3, come back illegally. 4, set for life. Okay, so this is something, I don't believe that this was made by an American who's angry at immigration policy. I think this is something that's coming out of, like a CIA type of
of course.
What do you call it? Propaganda campaign.
I think it goes without saying that much of what we see on the internet, as anything that gives us an emotional response to anything, whether it's bloody, beaten children in Gaza or, shit going down in Ukraine, it's all a CIA operation. And if you're not familiar with how the entire system is, especially if you're online, if you spend a lot of time on social media and a lot of these images promote some sort of emotional response from you, you're being manipulated by the CIA. And that goes for both sides, whether you're liberal or conservative. So JP wants to reflect on the morning email that we receive every day from the New York Times. It's free. And we don't look at it because we are big fans of the New York Times. We look at it so that we can gauge maybe what's coming next in the country, maybe where the conversations will be headed, maybe policy will be, maybe we can read between the lines in these free emails that we get that will somehow illuminate us as to what policies are coming next. So this is the one. It's called, from Wednesday, it's called The American Slowdown. It's part of the morning email So
Yeah.
written by German Lopez.
I know, right?
Which kind of an interesting name.
Yeah.
So
Haman.
Herman Lopez.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Yeah, no, it's
Okay.
fine.
So he's going to go ahead and read through it and kind of discuss his position on it, and I'll just scroll with him.
Right. So I don't know if I don't know if I should read this. Or
Well,
I
you don't
should
have
just-
to read
yeah,
it, but
so,
you can.
So yeah, so basically the premise of this is that the population of the U.S. and they get into it also the world population, post-industrial economies and countries are sharing in this, but what they're basically saying is that United States population has hit its peak. It's been going down. People are not having babies, and that the only way that we're really maintaining any sort of population growth is through immigration. They go through, evidence of this. They have a chart here. If you want to scroll back up, that chart there, where it's like 4 scenarios collected by the demographer William Frey. And it shows what could happen to the US population in 4 different scenarios. Each one, the population eventually peaks, but how soon it happens depends on how much immigration the country has. And so high immigration, historical, and low, and then 0. And then they go on to say, well, 0 is like it wouldn't happen. It's just there for, a good example of like, what might happen if there was 0 immigration policy. That's read between the lines. You're bad if you think that, there should be no immigration at all. But it's also saying it's unrealistic that, because the U.S. has always had some level of immigration. That's just part of, being in the United States.
Isn't that what the U.S. was founded on?
Yeah, basically. And so, it's a double-edged, kind of, factor there that they brought in. They go on to say many Americans favor lower levels of immigration. They worry that new immigrants take jobs and reduce pay. They also fear that new arrivals can change a nation's culture. Immigration. Now, this is Weasley. This whole thing, the New York Times is always Weasley in the way that they write things, right? They're basically assuming what you and I think. Okay, they're not telling us where they're getting this information like they do. They provide evidence otherwise, right? But they're not providing evidence on this opinion that they're saying. That many Americans. Okay, so where do they get that from?
Many Americans think. So whenever the media, sorry, I'm going to interject. Whenever the media says many Americans think, really, because each individual American and each individual person that lives in this country thinks different from the other person.
Right.
There may be some crossovers. There may be some things that we can all relate to, but I guarantee you, your thoughts are very unique to mine, and mine are very unique to yours. So when they make these sweeping, generalizing statements that begin with "many Americans think," anyway, that just bugs me about the media in general.
Well, that's editorialism, right? Mm-hmm. Or that's editorializing the content. Yeah, okay.
Right.
And so they say, they worry that new immigrants take jobs and reduce pay. They also fear that new arrivals can change a nation's culture. Immigration, especially the illegal kind, has fueled political instability around the world. Racism and xenophobia also play a role. So this last statement here, or second to last, immigration, especially the illegal kind, has fueled political instability around the world. Well, who's driving that? Who is driving that? They blame it on wars. So if you remember back a number of years, I guess it's up to 10 years now, this whole thing with the war in Syria that started driving immigration into Europe. People were coming in, across the Mediterranean on boats, and you remember all that, Julie?
Mm-hmm.
And they had all those videos of like dead kids on the beach. And shit.
Sure. Remember the image of the dead child on the beach?
Right. Yeah. So that was there to provoke some sort of response from you, and depending on your political or social point of view, you're going to have a different response. And so it's setting you up for instant like conflict, right? Political conflict, social conflict. Okay. Then they go on to talk about how immigration does have its, but immigration has benefits, and they talk about how it's basically helped America's economy stay ahead of its peers. And then they refer to an article written by somebody else, the New York Times, and how if we, don't let people in, we could suffer the same problems that Japan and China, potentially China have with stagnated economies. And then they go on to say, yet another thing that's a little bit that I can't trust, or that's basically weasel language again, is that they talk about how the U.S. could increase its population through having more children, but that's been declining and blah blah blah. Well, that's been declining because since I was a child, they've been propagandizing us, and as a child. And in growing into an adult, I believed the propaganda. Why? How could you not believe it? That there was global growth population, and then I swallowed that hook, line, and sinker.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have kids mostly because of what I had been hearing since I was a child. And so they do that double switch where it's like, okay, let's blame the people who have believed what they were told before. So now we're being told another story, right? So that's constant. That's a constant in our society, right? In the last 50, maybe 60 years that we get, or even longer, I'm sure, that we get two different messages coming at us at the same time to keep us off our game, basically to keep us, unfocused. And then, then it goes on, demographers and blah, blah, blah. And then for more, do millennials not want children, or are they merely delaying having them? About 2/3, and these are other headlines, about 2/3 of people now live in a country or area where fertility rates are below replacement level.
Can I interject?
Yeah, go on.
At least they're saying that. This, New York Times is like the most liberal, all of your liberal friends read it. And I think this might be the first time I've ever heard a liberal publication talk about declining birth rates. This, you just got through saying that you've been told your entire life that we are overpopulated.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that kept you from having children, is because you believed this liberal talking point, and there were all the statistics and all the science that proved it, and yet it wasn't true. And so now they're finally saying there is a low fertility rate. We're actually not overpopulated. So I find that really interesting, just in general.
Well, it's what I like to refer to as liberal hand wringing, and what I find, and because I was a big consumer of like NPR news for years. And what you always hear, and you see it in the New York Times too. So if you're familiar with the way that they talk, the way that they produce information and cover things, is they always present a problem, they wring their hands over it, and they go, oh, well, I guess there's nothing much we can do about it other than, be aware,
right,
and vote the right way, is basically, the message that they always come across.
Right.
And so speaking of that, further down in the email under the latest news, okay. So on the very last point here, where it says Biden, just above the soldier photo,
Biden said that.
Yeah, go ahead. You can read it.
Biden said that Trump despises Latinos in a Univision interview. He cited Trump's talk of immigrants, quote, poisoning the blood of the country. Yeah. Oh no, it's a bloodbath.
Right. Yeah, we can get
If you guys don't know the bloodbath joke, look it up.
Yeah,
it's pretty funny.
Anyway, well, Google apparently took away a given meaning of.
Oh, and that's actually really important, because with these audio broadcasts that I do every Friday, either at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., and today is at 11, so thank you for joining. It's all about the economy. So eventually, we're talking about this immigration stuff because eventually we're going to get to our point here. But I want to bring up what he just later on in the discussion. I'll bring up how the term bloodbath has been redefined. Okay, I just wanted to put a little pin in that, and then I'll come back to it.
All right. But the thing about the Trump, this thing about Biden and Trump, Biden saying that Trump despises Latinos. Whatever. It's an election year, but this is your pivot. So they oftentimes will hide the big news. They will bury the lead. This is your pivot point here. This last little bullet point where now, after reading the content above, that immigration and the policies surrounding it are going to be the focus of the
election.
The election, especially
Yeah.
coming from the Democrat side.
Mm-hmm. I would say that the thing that sort of started this is the next point down here. That started this entire immigration conversation is the next point down here, where it says the justices declined to block a Texas law that makes it a crime for unauthorized migrants to enter the state. Hours later, a lower court effectively blocked the law. Now, this was written on Wednesday, so who knows where those arguments went since today's Friday, 2 days later. But this is what sparked the conversation about the immigration situation. This New York Times article continues the conversation and hints at this idea that, like JP just said, that it's going to be effectively the thing that, is brought into the forefront of the election campaigns.
Yeah.
I'm sure every candidate is going to be discussing it first and foremost. It's on everyone's mind. Everyone's talking about it. And
well, there's one more thing.
okay.
Down here, this first bullet point after this photo, where it says Laura Loomer interviewing.
She's a favorite amongst like pretty much everyone on Twitter.
Yeah. What is her stance?
See, don't you love how JP doesn't know who Laura Loomer is? That's why I'm married to him. Because a lot of shit that is garbage, he doesn't even know about.
Yeah.
So we're looking at someone who's not filled with garbage when he talks, which I love. Like, she's just some right winger who goes out, and she's probably CIA.
Probably,
Yeah. I mean, if she's in the New York Times,
right.
then obviously she's.
Yeah. So right-wing influencers, so her, filming migrants near the Darien Gap in Central America and asking them pointed questions to influence opinions on immigration. So when I saw that, and then Julie showed me the video that we showed at the beginning of the broadcast, I thought of this point
right
when you showed me the video, because you showed me the video after, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, so these things are coming together. So you start seeing all these things coming from different places, and you start seeing a trend, right? That's where that's how we kind of put these things together. We kind of you said put a pin in it, and it's like I mentally bookmark or pin content like this over a span of time, just to start recognizing patterns or trends. One more thing, the rest of this week, the New York Times has been focusing on, or the last couple of days, they've been focusing on non-white voters going more to the Republican side, or becoming more right-wing in their voting habits. And again, they do that sort of like liberal hand-wringing, or even the shrug, like, how could this be? And at the same time, though, they chide their liberal, their very audience for not recognizing non-white voters as being a single block, right? And that they just always expect them to be Democrats and progressive like they are, and yet they're not. And you liberals have to learn this thing, but we still don't know why it's possible that, so, and they go through, and yet they'll still, like the one today or yesterday, I think it was today, they had like 2 charts that like contradicted each other. So, it's
well, here's one. I can share this one. This is from 2023 actually, but it's behind a paywall, so I can't show it. Yeah. And it's, why are Democrats losing the vote to non-white voters?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You can you can subscribe to the morning email for free, and then you can see on the site, the web version of the email is not behind a paywall. And you can see the two charts that I was talking about. They're kind of ridiculous because on one they show liberal whites, Democrat like white people who are Democrats. The amount of people who are like progressive or liberal was smaller than other segments, in fact. And then there was another chart that showed like this overwhelming amount of white people are more liberal. And so anyway, it was just they do that. And the other thing about their charts, and I've mentioned this in the past, is especially during the COVID thing, they would come out and say like blatantly obvious lies, or they would just come out and lie, and they would use a chart to back it up. And then if you actually, but the chart was like weaselly in the way it presented the numbers. So if you actually went in and did the math, it didn't support their argument. It supported the opposite of their argument. But in the chart, the way it looked like, all these people were succumbing to death from COVID. And it was like, but if you looked at the entire population of the country versus what they were saying in that chart, it was like a minuscule amount of people. It was like the normal amount of people that would die from, say, a winter of illness, right? The flu.
Right.
So yeah, fun and games.
Yeah. So back to the immigration situation. So what have we learned over the last 4 years? I mean, we have learned a lot. And one of the things that has come back to sort of haunt us in what we've experienced over the last 4 years is how all of those creeping questions that we ignored about the medical industry were now something that we could no longer ignore. And we realized that the medical industry is actually a kill industry. It's actually not a health industry. It's not there to make you well. It's there to make you worse. Put you on medications to change your behavior, put you on medications to keep you from doing, especially women, what their bodies are naturally supposed to do, which is, ovulate, or, what I'm saying? That's birth control. We find out that in birth control is actually a big reason why so many women are considered like bipolar. I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, so don't come to my house and arrest me, but I'm just basing it on what I've read, what I've heard people say, doctors I've listened to who've given interviews, statistics that have been shared, science that has been proven, all this stuff. I'm just repeating it. And so anyway, long story short is we learned that the medical industry is bad news, right?
It's there to make you sick.
It's there to make you sick.
So
and
that
now
they can make money.
And now it's run by the military, basically. Basically the HHS, the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, all the 3-letter health agencies are backed by the military through these emergency authorizations. So anytime there's an emergency, all rights, all freedoms go bye-bye, and they can do whatever they want.
And funding flows to those issues,
to the medical industry itself, hospitals, clinics, pharmaceutical industry, all that stuff, right? So we as Americans have decided a big portion of us have decided to turn our back on it. We're done. It's like, how much more do you have to prove to us that you don't have our best interest at heart? There are people that have walked away from all of their, medications that they've had to take their whole life, practically just walked away. People that stopped doing, chemo, people that just have said, we're done with the killing. We're done with the making us sicker and sicker and sicker. Americans are the sickest population on the planet. I started, and just as I promise I'm getting somewhere with this, but I want to just tell you a little story. I ordered some snack food from France. And it tastes different.
Le snack food.
It tastes different, doesn't it?
Le food de snack.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
It tastes different. It's not full of chemicals. And I'm not talking like extravagant snack food. I'm talking like the French version of Cheetos.
Right.
You know, somebody gave it a review and I was like, that's interesting. And they said it tastes different than American Cheetos. So I bought it. And when I opened it up, I was like, oh yeah, it tastes different.
It's probably using real cheese.
It just tastes different. And, you know, some other things that I purchased too. And so if they're doing that to snack food, imagine what else they're doing it to
You're so fancy.
In our food industry. Like imagine, so a lot of people are saying, especially popular podcasters now are saying, you know, I think a lot of why we are so sick in America is because of our food, our food consumption, you know, it's so chemicalized now.
Yeah.
So what have we learned? We've learned to walk away from the medical industry. And so what does that do for the medical industry? They're losing a big portion of their customer base, basically.
Right.
So they have to replace the customer base. And this is why I wanted to show you this screen. So this is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website. Here are all of the vaccines that are required for immigrants: mumps, measles, rubella, polio, tetanus and diphtheria toxoids, pertussis, Haemophilus influenza type B, hepatitis B, COVID-19 vaccine, and any other vaccine preventable disease recommended by ACIP, or the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices. I didn't even know what ACIP was until the COVID operation was foisted upon us, and some extremely intelligent people from the medical industry and from the health industry, the government health industry, were like, if we can get rid of ACIP, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, this whole thing falls apart. So ACIP is basically telling U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, as well as the CDC, as well as the FDA, as well as the NIH, blah, blah, blah. They're telling them what sort of vaccines we all need. But Americans who were born here are kind of backing away from, I mean, we have an entire section of the population that live in the middle of the country. They're called the Amish, who have never been vaccinated. You know, there's big swathes of the population, of the American population, that have actually never even had a vaccine. And somehow they've been able to survive. They've been able to go to school. They've been able to get an education. They've been able to get jobs, and yet they've never been vaccinated. And now even more people are walking away from the medical industry as a whole.
Right.
So they have to replace those people with new people. This is my opinion about it. Maybe that seems a little simple-minded
I
think
this is a good assessment, because they need to make that extra money somewhere. And so why not start importing bodies to industrialize and to enter into the medical industrial complex. Now, here's something else that I think is parallel to that, with the immigration and allowing people just to come across the border and give them these hotels and whatnot. They're also now becoming part of the poverty industrial complex. Okay, so we lived in a little city just outside of Pittsburgh. I consider it Pittsburgh. It's part of the greater Pittsburgh, and it was a community of deep poverty. In fact, that area probably had more Section 8 housing than anywhere else in Pennsylvania, if not just at least anywhere in Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is. And its share of the burden was completely skewed, right? It bore the brunt of poverty in Pennsylvania, and lo and behold, it's also considered the most dangerous city in the state, which is total bullshit. But because we lived there and we knew that it wasn't that unsafe. that it was, it's just a community of poor people. Anyway, they are the poverty industrial complex, as we've pointed out many times before, is set up to keep people in the system. People who are born into the system are basically there for life. There's just no way that you're going to get out of it unless you're just a very extraordinary person, or that the state or the powers, go, well, we could actually use this person in our world, and we can get them out. So, these people pop up now and then, and they're used and trotted out and used as examples of, oh, look how they, pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps bullshit, right? But for the most part, most people are just pushed into this, born into this, and kept there because they're there for the state and the three-letter agencies, as well as the nonprofit organizations, to continually make money from them. Okay, it's just they're there to make money from. So we talk about wraparound services. That's your nonprofit industrial complex. There's the welfare state. There's housing, HUD. All these agencies are there to keep poor people poor because that's how they make money.
Right.
Okay, so those people are getting, they kind of like got to a certain point, and it's like, okay, well, we only have so many poor people in the United States, and we've made as many poor people as possible, by creating homelessness. So we're running out of people. We still need to keep making money. So how are we going to do that?
Right. So this is something that JP and I have talked a lot about on this platform. We take pretty much everything that you see in the media, or everything that you see on social media especially, should take a back seat to the fact that we have NGOs, nonprofits, wraparound services, government-funded programs that exist on the backs of the impoverished population. That is how our country is run. Now, I need to put a disclaimer in there. If you are an individual and you are disabled and you can't keep up with the rest of the healthy population because for whatever reason, and you need services, then that's good. That's a good thing that those services are there to help people. You have the right to eat. You have the right to live in dignity. You have a right to have shelter. You have a right to experience the world in the best way you can. I like seeing that, certain places that I could never go as a child because I spent, 10 years in a wheelchair practically, are more wheelchair accommodating now than they've ever been. So there's no reason why somebody who's stuck in a wheelchair shouldn't get, the same benefits out of life
Correct.
that everyone else does.
Right.
Okay. So I guess my point is that those services that exist for people who were made sick, or for people who were made poor but are struggling to get out of it, that's fine, But what we're talking about is an entire system that is banking on and keeping people employed and exploiting. So, for instance, we know people in the nonprofit industry who make six figures a year, and the claim of their organization is that they want to provide better housing, or they want to provide better health care, or they want to provide better this or that, or services to people. And yet none of the people that they claim to help are actually helped, but they themselves are getting six figures a year and living quite comfortably. So, and I've talked about this a lot, and I actually outed somebody in our former neighborhood of deep poverty. I outed her, and I did a whole broadcast about her. And I don't know if she saw it or not, but she saw me in the grocery store a couple days later, and oh my God, it was super uncomfortable. So, this is something that we're not afraid to talk about. This is something that we begin all of our conversations on this platform about. And if you are going to talk about the immigration policy, if you're going to talk about immigrants, then you have to begin the conversation with is that they are basically being used. They're being lured over, allowed in, and they're being used so that these NGOs and these nonprofits and 501c3s and these government-funded wraparound services can continue to employ people who don't really give a shit about them. That's what's really going on. And so one of the reasons I wanted to begin the conversation, about this great taking, is not to discuss the immigration policy with the idea that they're going to take away your jobs. That is a childish and stupid response. That's an idiotic response. Nobody's going to take away your jobs. Nobody's going to take away your housing. These people are being used so that your friends who work in the nonprofit industry can continue to be employed, and their wallets and their paychecks can get padded pretty well on the backs of people who don't understand that they're being used. What does this sound like to you? You mentioned it. It starts with an S and begins and ends with a Y. You mentioned it to me when I was so angry about all of the right-wingers who are coming out and all the conservative assholes who are coming out blaming immigrants. Oh, they're going to take my jobs. Oh, they're going to take my house. Oh, they're going to come to my house with a gun and take away my home and all this stuff. And I was so mad that they were going there and not actually focusing on the truth, which is that it's NGOs, 501c3s, wraparound services that exist solely to make sure that these people remain poor. And you said that sounds like
fuckery,
slavery.
Oh, slavery.
It begins with an S, not an F. But it may as well be. It may as well be F.
What did I say?
You said it sounds like slavery. So
Yeah.
if you go back a few hundred years ago, this is exactly how the nation was built. Whether you believe it or not, I don't really care. But the point is that individuals were brought over on ships, and they were traded and moved into different types of services, whether they were, building homes or picking cotton or, cleaning houses or whatever. They were pushed into certain industries, and those industries existed on the backs of individuals who didn't get paid. And they were treated pretty badly. Granted, the immigration population, according to, many people out there, even people who are part of the wraparound services that benefit from the poor people, they will say, of course, we want to give them, housing and maid service. They shouldn't have to live in squalor.
Right.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the attitude around the immigration policy is so,
Skewed
amongst the social media population. And I don't know if the general American population really even thinks about it or even has an opinion about it. I think most Americans are so busy. It seems like a lot of people that we know around here don't really fall for the trap.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think that there are some, that a lot of people, if they care at all, go to the reactionary place, and that's easy to do because of what we just heard in that interview, right? And I want to underline this because before you've talked about Zuboff,
Shoshana
Zuboff,
Harvard educated CIA agent,
talking about how,
or Harvard professor, I should say.
So talking about how we are now the gold that they mine, right?
Right.
And
We're the gold.
And because we're living in the U.S., we're we have jobs and everything, but they're using our online presence to extract from us. Okay, so if you take that one step sideways, I guess, and think about the immigrants now are also becoming that resource. Okay, so their bodies, their very being in the United States now are a source of income, just like we are a source of income online with our online presence. They're a source of income by their physical presence in the United States. They've now become slaves in a different manner. And if you look at the progression of slavery in the United States and in the world for the last, say, maybe 500 years, you went from chattel slavery And then once the Industrial Revolution took place, you had wage slavery. So chattel slavery morphed into wage slavery, which we're still in. We're still part of the wage slavery system, and we're still slaves, believe it or not. But now we're kind of transitioning into another kind of slavery at the same time. And I believe that that's the kind of slavery that prisoners and immigrants are being pushed into.
Exactly. Now, I want to take this one last point, and then I'll continue with the reading. Okay. The last point I have regarding this immigration conversation, it circles back a little bit to blockchain. If you go back to a few hundred years ago with the slave situation, one of the reasons that slavery ended in the United States, not because, the right person on the right side of history won the war or whatever, it was because there was no way to really track them anymore. It was becoming financially difficult to track them. There was no way, insurance companies were losing money
right. The
on
underwriters,
them because the underwriters for human beings. So think of it this way. You have to have insurance for your home. Well, back then they were insuring human beings. They were insuring slaves.
Mm-hmm. And not for health benefits. They're insuring them for, whether they, if they died, if they ran away, if they, whatever the case may be, right?
Exactly.
Because they were considered property. So it was like,
it was insuring property.
Right.
Okay. So, and that became
difficult to
a
do.
Loss in the industry.
Right.
Like they were losing money. And so finally it was like, we can't do this anymore because we're losing money, not because they cared about human beings being used as,
Right. Yeah. Because let's just say it. Abraham Lincoln was opposed to freeing the slaves before he wasn't.
Exactly.
He changed his mind suddenly
because the insurance people were like, look, we're losing money a lot. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think that there were other business decisions that
let's
were
create
happening
wage
around
slavery.
that.
Yeah.
Right. And so
what's happening with the immigration policy is it's also giving an excuse for that to never happen again. They want to make sure that they can track and continue to make money. And when I say they, I'm talking about the NGOs, the 501c3s, the nonprofits that benefit greatly by making sure that individuals and families specifically down to their DNA practically are tracked and put on a chain. Slaves back in the day were put on, it's called the chain gang, or prisoners were put on the chain gang. Well, it's kind of like that. They're going to be put on a digital chain so that they can be tracked. Now, the conversation around blockchain to me is infuriating to me for so many different reasons. Number one, we're not there yet. The technology just isn't there. Talk to any engineer. They're like, no one can afford the people who would actually create the blockchain. They're expensive.
Right.
And the government doesn't want to pay a bunch of tech nerds,
right,
that kind of money. Okay.
They're not able to go to scale.
They're not able to go to scale, but they sure do want to.
And who's supporting it are corporations like IBM and stuff.
Right. They can afford it. And so they just...
But they're still not there yet.
They're not. And so, but... so that's the first part, is that we're not there yet. It's not affordable. The technology isn't there. And so a lot of people on social media, especially, they've got to be some kind of assets or agents, in my opinion, or they're just useful idiots, are getting it wrong.
Like somebody whose name rhymes with Phantom Mo.
They're getting it wrong. They're getting it totally wrong. And they're just leading hundreds and thousands of users down this ridiculous path. And those users are saying things like this. Oh, this is so depressing. This is so awful. I'm going to be on a blockchain. Oh, no. It's not you privileged idiot. It's going to be the immigrants. It's going to be the prison population. So you get these and this is my second gripe with the blockchain conversation, is I went through and read a whole bunch of comments from some useful idiot who believes that blockchain is like a real thing and it's here and it's now and he's like all scared and bringing in a lot of chaos and confusing conversation. And here are the majority of the comments. I don't understand what you're saying because I'm not technically minded. And number two, man, maybe I should just go live on an island somewhere. Just go buy a piece of land on an island and throw away all my devices and get off and just, live off the land. And I'm thinking to myself, excuse me, but your privilege is really showing. If you have the kind of money that you're even thinking about doing that, so blockchain. And so that's my second gripe is the amount of people that are screaming and yelling about blockchain are the people that will never, ever be on it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But all that said, let me just begin with that so that you understand my position on this. All that said, this is what the future holds for the immigrant population if they can ever get their act together
and make
the blockchain a thing. Blockchain-based distributed ledger implementation could make the travel and immigration process more secure and streamlined, as well as improve efficiency. Efficiency and possibly lower the cost. This is just one narrow example of the endless potential of blockchain. The goal for blockchain is not you, it's for immigration. And that's one of the reasons why they're just flooding the border. That's one of the reasons why that little state of Texas that tried to block this from happening, the flooding of the immigrants across their border, that's why a court told them you're not allowed to keep these people from coming in. I don't think. Texas, I mean, one of the reasons.
I don't think Texas would ever want to hear you refer to them as a little state.
I know, that's why I said it. I said that to make people bristle and to irritate people. I said it that way on purpose. But what I'm trying to say is that the goal behind the immigration policy is the continuation of the wraparound services, the 501c3s, the
NGOs.
Think of all of the people that are employed to make sure that these people are never, ever contributing to society in a meaningful way, even down to the housekeepers who clean the hotel rooms, even down to, the grocery store clerk that fills up their bag and they pay for that grocery with their EBT card, which I've been on EBT before. I have no problem with it. You know what I'm saying? Or think about the medical industrial complex that is just going to make just a ton of money based on all of the vaccines that those immigrants have to take. They're going to get sick. They're going to need care. They're going to need wraparound services because they're going to be diagnosed with some strange disease after having to take, an endless amount of vaccines just to live in this country. This is slavery.
Right. And
this is using their body for profit,
right,
you guys.
Right. Their very presence, their physical presence. And so this is going to be a miserable life. I mean,
for them.
I don't know
and
about
then
you,
putting them on a chain,
right,
on a blockchain here.
I wouldn't. Okay, so here's the
means
thing.
that they can never get out of it.
Everybody thinks that they're going to be completely free to do whatever they want, and they're living off the government. They're living off your taxes, and that's completely false. They're not going to be free. They're going to be completely controlled. Can you imagine living in a hotel room for the rest of your life, or at least for the next 5 years?
Or something similar.
Because
those hotel rooms are temporary.
Right.
It's because it's a revolving door.
Right, exactly.
And until they get a permanent housing,
mm-hmm.
And
so they're going to be pushed into some sort of housing that's going to be, where they will have no choices on where they live, how they live, and what they do. Their life will always be controlled through whatever thing they're told that they need to do next.
Right. And so the only other hope that they could possibly have with getting off this chain, getting off this, medical slavery, if they ever become wise to what the government and the NGOs and the 501c3s and all these wraparound services are really doing to them, where can they go? They can't go back to their home country. Well, I suppose they could, but would they want to? Well, guess what else we're letting across the border, like with no resistance? Cartels. Drug cartels and gang leaders. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of influence, and they have a lot of power. And how much you want to bet that they are stationed and strategically placed in areas where there's high immigration population. So the drug cartels can easily tell these immigrant people who maybe want to get off this awful chain that they could potentially be on, sure, we'll give you a job and we'll pay you lots of money. We'll pay you more than your welfare benefits. So these people are being set up, you guys.
Mhm.
And I wish that the reactionary right, and I wish that the
liberal hand-wringers
and the liberal hand-wringers would start to focus in on the truth about what the immigration situation is really about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One last thought, and that's
or else it'll be a bloodbath.
It'll be a bloodbath, Julie. One last thing, and you can transition to that.
Mm-hmm.
The cartels are not just selling drugs anymore. They are beginning to focus on scams and taking away, basically draining your bank account. So keep in mind and stay tuned and be careful around any sort of phone call, any sort of text, any sort of email that is allegedly from your bank or your credit card company or whatever, saying, oh, there's a problem, and you better give me your credentials so that I can get into your bank account and make sure that everything's okay, so they can basically drain your bank account. So be very aware and be very careful. The phone calls that they make and the texts they make are designed to catch you off guard when you're in the middle of something else.
Check this out, guys.
So make sure that if there is something that happens like that, hang up and call your bank directly. Okay.
Look at this. One of Mexico's most violent criminal groups, Jalisco New Generation, runs call centers that offer to buy retirees' vacation properties. Then it empties its victims' bank accounts.
Yeah,
and so that is just
headline,
one example of what it is. And even if CNN or the New York Times are talking about it,
doesn't mean it's not real.
Doesn't mean it's not real. Doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right.
Of course, they'll spin it into a sympathetic way, sympathetic conversation.
Or blaming the victim.
Or blame the victim.
Right.
But it's happening. So.
And it's a bloodbath, Julie.
It's a bloodbath. So what I want to do is talk about what went on with the term bloodbath before I read the next chapter. And I'll just, David Rogers Webb wrote this really short book called The Great Taking. And so everybody thank JP for being a part of this conversation for the first hour of this broadcast.
Wow.
I'll probably spend another 20-30 minutes reading from the book, and then we'll call it a day.
All right,
so
cool.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
All right. So, but one thing that he does is he writes these really, really short chapters. So this broadcast will probably end soon. But before that, I want to talk to you about the term bloodbath. So it's apparently it was used in financial terminology. Like, I don't know for sure, but I was listening to someone and I was like, wait a minute. So it's not just about, the effects of a violent situation. Like, oh, it was a bloodbath. Everybody was like you see in movies, right? And oh, how did you like that scene? Oh, it was a bloodbath. Everybody was murdered and there was blood everywhere. Oh my gosh, it was a bloodbath. Well, apparently bloodbath also is like a financial term. And that Google actually changed the definition of it and took away the financial meaning of the term bloodbath. And the only reason that the word bloodbath is trending in the United States right now is because Trump said, if you do this thing in this particular industry, there will be a financial bloodbath. He didn't use the term financial, but he said bloodbath. And he was using it in the way that financiers or economists would use it. But of course, the media twisted it around and said he was being violent. And so now political Google has actually removed the financial definition or the financial meaning around bloodbath. Isn't that interesting, the way language is being recreated right before our eyes, and that history is being recreated right before our eyes? I thought that was really an interesting thing that took place this week or within the last couple of weeks. Okay, so let me get rid of this screen and we'll continue with the reading of David Rogers Webb's The Great Taking. So we are now on chapter 8, and it's called Bank Holiday. And it begins with a William Blake quote. They have bartered their birthright for a mess of pottage. So that's a William Blake quote. And he always begins every chapter with very short quotes with Sun Tzu. I think he even had a quote from Orwell, a short quote from Orwell. And now he's quoting William Blake. And I think he even had a quote from Toy Story, which I thought was really funny. Yeah, Humpty Dumpty was pushed, says Mr. Potato Head of Toy Story. So they have bartered their birthright for a mess of pottage. That's from William Blake. And so this is chapter 8 as we continue reading David Rogers Webb's The Great Taking. My Aunt Elizabeth had been 10 years old when the banks were closed by executive order in 1933. When I asked her to tell me about the Great Depression, she said that suddenly no one had any money, and that even wealthy families had no money and had to take their daughters out of private school because they could not pay for the tuition. I wondered why even these wealthy families could not send their children back to their schools after the banks were reopened. The answer is that only the Federal Reserve banks and banks selected by the Federal Reserve were allowed to reopen. The Federal Reserve banks, writes Alan Meltzer, sent the Treasury lists of banks recommended for reopening, and the Treasury licensed those it approved. Meltzer's study, A History of the Federal Reserve, is considered the most comprehensive history of the central bank. People with money in banks that were not allowed to reopen lost all of it. Their debts were not canceled, however. These were taken over by the banks selected by the Federal Reserve System. If these people could not make their debt payments, which was now likely since they had lost their cash, they lost everything they had financed with any amount of debt, like their house, their car, and their business. Thousands of banks were never allowed to reopen. The grand facades of former bank buildings could be seen around Cleveland. There was such devastation of banks that a neighborhood Catholic church was built with massive stone columns salvaged from a bank building which had been demolished. The Cleveland Trust Company had grown through acquisition to become, by 1924, the largest bank in the United States. You know what? I want to insert a little anecdote about the church that I am a member of and that I used to attend in San Francisco. It's called Calvary Presbyterian. And somebody asked me, oh, which church is that again? And I said, oh, the one that looks like a bank up in Pacific Heights. So, it's interesting that he talks about how in Cleveland, where he grew up, that a Catholic church built its structure from the remnants of a closed down bank. Okay, so the Cleveland Trust Company had grown through acquisition to become, by 1924, the sixth largest bank in the United States. As noted by the Case Western Reserve University Encyclopedia of Cleveland History, the bank survived the Depression well. Well, how is this possible? It was selected by the Federal Reserve to consolidate debts. I had a finance professor who told the class that Cleveland Trust had run a systematic process of foreclosing upon and evicting many thousands of families from their homes in the greater Cleveland area. After these families were evicted from their homes and their equity wiped out, they were offered the possibility of moving back into their former homes as renters. The advantage to Cleveland Trust being that these families would pay to keep the houses heated until they could be sold. Cleveland Trust did well. How did my finance professor know about this? His family was one of those many thousands of families whose home mortgage had been taken over by Cleveland Trust. Contrast this with the cheery image conveyed by William L. Silber, who was a member of the Economic Advisory Panel of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And in his article, Why Did FDR's Bank Holiday Succeed? So he writes, much to everyone's relief, when the institutions reopened for business on March 13th, depositors stood in line to return their hoarded cash to neighborhood banks. And within 2 weeks, Americans had redeposited more than half of the currency that they had squirreled away before the suspension. The market registered its approval as well. And on March 15th, 1933, the first day of trading after the extended closure, the New York Stock Exchange recorded the largest one-day price increase ever. And with the benefit of hindsight, the nationwide bank holiday in March of 1933 ended the bank runs that had plagued the Great Depression. Contemporary observers consider the bank holiday and the fireside chat the 1-2 punch that broke the back of the Great Depression. The speed with which the Bank Holiday Act reestablished the integrity of the payment system demonstrates the power of credible regime-shifting policies. The Emergency Banking Act of 1933 had been passed by Congress on March 9, 1933, 3 days after FDR declared the bank holiday, with only a single copy available on the floor of the House of Representatives, and with copies being made available to senators as the bill was being proposed to the Senate after it passed the House. Was it successful? We are led to believe that the bank holiday was a brilliant scheme. Well, it was for some. It was enormously successful for those banking interests who took the assets and consolidated their power. It certainly demonstrated the power of regime-shifting policies. We will see that it was not just about taking people's homes and other stuff. As to ending the panic, perhaps that is not so difficult to do when you have fomented the panic itself. In the Wikipedia article, The Great Depression, we find the following illumination of the Fed's odd behavior in the years leading up to the bank holiday. The monetarist explanation was given by American economists Milton Friedman and Anna J. Schwartz. They argued that the Great Depression was caused by the banking crisis that caused 1/3 of all banks to vanish, a reduction of bank shareholder wealth, and more importantly, monetary contraction of 35%, which they called the Great Contraction. By not lowering interest rates, by not lowering rates, and by not injecting liquidity into the banking system to prevent it from crumbling, the Federal Reserve passively watched the transformation of a normal recession into the Great Depression. The Federal Reserve allowed some large public bank failures, particularly that of the New York Bank of the United States in December of 1930, which produced panic and widespread runs on local banks, and the Federal Reserve sat idly by while banks collapsed. Friedman and Schwartz argued that if the Fed had provided emergency lending to these key banks or simply bought government bonds on the open market to provide liquidity and increase the quantity of money after the key banks fell, all the rest of the banks would not have fallen after the large ones did, and the money supply would not have fallen as far and as fast as it did. This view was endorsed in 2002 by Federal Reserve Governor Ben Bernanke in a speech honoring Milton Friedman and Schwartz with this statement. Let me end my talk by abusing slightly my status as an official representative of the Federal Reserve. I would like to say to Milton and Anna, regarding the Great Depression, you're right. We did it. We're very sorry. But thanks to you, we won't do it again. Yeah, want to bet? As this is ancient history, it was safe for Bernanke to make such an admission, but more to the point, it would allow him to posture as the wise man who had studied the mistakes of the Federal Reserve, and then to justify the Fed's extraordinary measures to follow in the global financial crisis. And this is the one that happened in 2008. That's what the global financial crisis is that he's referring to. Is the Fed indeed very sorry? Can one believe the promise that we won't do it again? They have studied the lessons of the past in detail. However, their purpose has been to prepare a new and improved global version of the spectacular end of this debt expansion supercycle. That's what this book is about. Contrary to the image of success, which has been handed down to us, the bank holiday did not end the Great Depression. There was no recovery, which might have allowed people to service their debts and keep their property. Why was that? Well, inexplicably, the Federal Reserve kept conditions tight. According to literature on the subject, the possible causes were a contraction in the money supply caused by the Federal Reserve and Treasury Department policies and contractionary fiscal policies. If that was a comprehensive program to assure there was no recovery, it worked quite well. Conditions remained broadly stressful for years, and they kept price levels down so that people had no opportunity to sell assets for paying off debts. I know from family letters that despite having no debts, times were quite tough. Grandma Webb wrote to her son, who was in a youth athletic program on an army base, about Grandpa Webb having been out trying to get any work for Webb equipment. This was in 1936. Contrary to the image of FDR as a savior, the people in my family who lived through the 30s considered FDR to be something like Satan himself, and they were not religious people. Here is an interesting quote from Silber. The Emergency Banking Act of 1933, passed by Congress on March 9th, combined with the Federal Reserve's commitment to supply unlimited amounts of currency to reopened banks, created de facto 100% deposit insurance. So according to William L. Silber, who was an economic advisor to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the Fed miraculously and suddenly in March of 1933 had the means to supply unlimited amounts of currency to reopen banks, which were, of course, only the banks selected by the Federal Reserve System. Clearly, the Fed had the means all along to avoid the failure of those thousands of banks. A panic can be fomented easily when you run the system. They made it happen. They planned it, and then brought their solution after they got their regime-shifting policies in place. The Federal Reserve System and the banks selected by the Fed were prepared to take things from people on a vast scale. Their homes, their cars, and even their new electric appliances, which had been sold to them with the innovation of consumer credit. Did the bankers need to take this property? What was the real purpose? Can you get past the idea that they were trying to help? Even if we can, we are always led to think about this in a small way, that it's always about a natural human greed for money and for material things. It was not then, and it is not now. So I want to pause here and of course, bring in my own personal and, opinionated and just speculative analysis of, people having to give back their things like their electric appliances, like their maybe, I don't know, were washing machines around then or ovens or whatever. What does that tell you psychologically about a system that banks on, pardon the pun, to feel banks on humiliation? Right? You know how humiliating it is not to be able to wash your clothes or have hot food, or, you're just living in this constant state of degradation where you're just, in society, we look down on people who are poor. We just do. So this entire thing was meant to undermine a person's self-worth. You're told your entire life. You're born. If you follow all the rules, do the right thing, don't get into trouble, go to school, eat right, exercise, be kind to strangers, be kind to animals, get good grades, go to college, work a good job, punch in on time, punch out on time, don't take advantage, don't lie, don't do that. All these things that we're supposed to follow, all the rules that we're supposed to follow. But it seems as though the financial system is above all that. And it's just going to turn us into humiliated meat bags anyway, where we can't wash our clothes, or we can't eat properly, or, we can't do things that give us any kind of dignity, right? So why is it that our financial system is so tied to a person's dignity? I mean, it just seems so petty and ridiculous to say, we have to take your coffee pot. It's petty, right? I mean, when I read that paragraph, I was just like, God, that's just so gross. And so in this new economy where you will own nothing and be happy, there's this idea that, I'll just use our house for example. So our house in the Gulf Coast, we have a guest room. So if things got really, really bad, we could rent out that guest room. We would have to rent out a portion of our own home in our private, intimate, space that we have worked our asses off and our fingers to the bone to get. We would have to share, it sounds selfish, right? But there's something about living in dignity, or living in dignity, not indignity, but living dignified, where you have to like rent out your coffee pot in order to make payments on it, or you have to rent out your shower, and someone will give you $10 to use their shower. Like, this is just ridiculous, right? But that's the system that they want to create for us, so that we are completely and totally not really owning anything that we own at all outright, and that we can use it, our personal bodies and lives, as leverage, so that we can hold on to some sort of semblance of dignity. That's just my 2 cents. The Federal Reserve System and the banks selected by the Fed were prepared to take things from people on a vast scale: their homes, their cars, and even their new electric appliances. So ask yourself, if they don't want your money, and they don't really want or need your stuff, and they're not trying to help you, what do they want? What's the point of all their efforts? Well, I just said it. They want your dignity. They want your humanity. They want your pride. They want you to, like we spent the first hour of this broadcast talking about, they want you to become equal to those people that are crossing the border and who are just going to be enslaved for the rest of their lives to wraparound services. They don't want you to know of your own potential. This may be difficult to hear, and it was deliberate. This may be difficult to hear. It was deliberate strategy. Well, duh. It was about ultimate complete power, allowing no centers of resistance. And so it was about deprivation. It was about subjugation. And it still is in more ways than we know. So I've never read this book before. And before I even moved on to the next paragraph, I was nailing it. Subjugation, deprivation, losing your dignity, losing your humanity. So he and I are on the same page, and all of you are on the same page too. It's just that my concern is that User Nation, social media, all the things that you feel and all the things that you see on social media, which are manipulating your thoughts and your feelings about stuff, are clouding your judgment regarding the fact that you have somehow been okay living without dignity. I've talked about this friend of mine before. This is somebody I've known for, since I was 18 years old. I'm now, in my 50s. He did all the right things. College, never got married, but whatever. Always paid his bills on time, always paid his rent on time, was very generous, helped me out when I was in financial trouble, helped me out in the past. Always, looked clean, and, he didn't go outside of the margins that society has created for him, right? Well, right now he's homeless and starving. And you know, that's the thanks he gets for following the rules. You know, that's his reward for doing everything right. He got his college degree. He always paid his rent on time. If he had a credit card, he always paid off the balance at the end of every month. You know, he never went into debt. He did all the right things. And look where he is now. He is wandering the streets of Chicago, emaciated, sick, and isn't sure what to do, how to fix himself. Okay, so the audio is cutting out. That's really interesting. When I start talking about dignity is when the audio cuts out. I'm going to put a comment in the broadcast. Let me see if you can see it. And then what I'm going to do is do a test. Okay. So it is interesting that when I start talking about dignity and how the financial system is doing everything it can, it is interesting that when I start system is doing. Okay, well, I am hearing everything well on my end. So if you are having trouble hearing me, please make a comment. But I'm going to continue reading. I told you about my friend's story and, you know, how he did everything right. And look where he is now, starving and homeless. Okay. So while Cleveland is now a crumbling city, it was a center of incredible prosperity in the 1920s. The Federal Reserve Bank building in Cleveland was completed in 1923, less than 10 years after the signing of the Federal Reserve Act. The bank vault is the largest in the world, and it incorporates the largest hinge ever built. It seems they were preparing to put a lot of stuff in there, and for the possibility that there might be some stress about that. Perhaps it was not to be filled with refrigerators, washing machines, and toasters. There are machine gun turrets above the sidewalk on the street level. There was a larger objective. It was not about helping people then, and it's not about helping people now. It is all part of the same deliberate hurting of humanity and elimination of any pockets of resilience which plagues us still. The preparatory work had been laid when the Federal Reserve System was secretly planned, and with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in the quiet before Christmas of 1913, the Federal Reserve Act set up an inevitable logic that the Fed must make the gold of the public in a sufficiently major crisis. Okay, I'm going to read that sentence again, and I want you to tie it into this immigration policy and what Shoshana Zuboff told us. We are the gold, our bodies are the gold that are being mined for profit. The Federal Reserve Act set up an inevitable logic that the Fed must take the gold of the public in a sufficiently major crisis with the justification that credit could not be expanded otherwise. Create a crisis of a health crisis. And what is your gold? GOLD, not GOAL. I know that sometimes with an audio, words can be misconstrued. So let me spell it out for you. In the midst of a health crisis, or what they're telling you is a health crisis, what is the GOLD? What is the gold? It's you. It's your body. It's your ability to fight off, toxins. It's your immune response to your environment. It's your ability to digest good food, which will keep you healthy. All the nutrients will run into your bloodstream. That is what they call the gold. So if we take this financial crisis, that took place with the Great Depression and how all the gold was absconded with, and that the Federal Reserve Act, which was set up in 1913, it was all about taking, you know, actual gold, GOLD, then this crisis that took place, that we're told took place, this health crisis that took place, it's the same thing. It's the taking of the gold in you, which is your health. And also your mind, which helps you make, you know, if you have the capacity for critical thinking, if you eat the right kinds of foods that keep your brain sharp. If, you know, we take olive leaf, by the way. Don't arrest me. I'm not a doctor. But I give JP especially lots of olive leaf, and I take some myself. It's supposed to stave off brain deteriorating diseases, you know. So look into it. But anyway, so your body is the gold in a crisis, and the gold is the gold in a financial crisis, right? So I'm just trying to help you. I'm just trying to compare the two, right? So this is exactly what is now set up to happen with all securities owned by the public globally. Here's an important excerpt from the Wikipedia article on the executive order. The stated reason for the order was that hard times had caused hoarding of gold. Imagine the NIH, the HHS, the CDC, the FDA. They all imagine all of the heads of these agencies, along with the DoD for some reason, along with the Department of Defense and our military. The heads of these agencies all got together and they said, you know what those Americans are doing? They're hoarding their health. They're hoarding their brains. They're hoarding their strong bodies. They're hoarding their the blood that's running, you know, the way it should in their circulatory system. They are hoarding their digestive process. They're hoarding their strong muscles and their good bones and their good joints. How dare they? We need to fix that. Okay? So they don't look at us as normal people. They look at us as hoarders. You ever seen the movie Hoarder, or the TV shows about hoarding and all of the mental issues and all of the trauma and the weirdness that comes around people who hoard in their homes and that live amongst garbage? That's how they think of us. That we're hoarding our health, that we're hoarding our money. They think of us as hoarders. However, the main rationale behind the order was actually to remove the constraint on the Federal Reserve, preventing it from increasing the money supply during the Depression. So remember, he talked about just a couple of paragraphs ago, the Great Depression was a nothing burger. It was just a regular little recession that was happening that was made a lot worse. All the federal had to do was maybe put, I don't know, a couple $1 million into one of the big banks, and it would have been fine. But they allowed the big bank to fail, which then caused everyone in the country to do a run on the bank. And then, of course, the media hyped up these, you know, big banks failing. And so small town America and middle America ran to their local banks and took all their money out. There was a big run on the bank during the COVID crisis, too. So the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 required 40% gold backing of Federal Reserve notes that were issued. And by the late 1920s, the Federal Reserve had almost reached the limit of allowable credit in the form of Federal Reserve demand notes, which could be backed by gold in its possession. The executive order to confiscate all gold owned by the public was made under the authority of the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, which had been enacted 4 years after the creation of the Federal Reserve. So in 1990, I had a former employer give me a teeny tiny little gold coin. You know, it's like 1/10 of an ounce. You know, you've seen them. They're super, super tiny. So does that mean that I'm now, and that she was, and I am now, in violation of the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, so which had been enacted 4 years after the creation of the Federal Reserve. The act had been used to confiscate the property of interned natives of Germany and more. This is described by Daniel A. Gross in his article, "The U.S. Confiscated $500 million in Private Property During World War I," whose subtitle reads, "America's Home Front was the site of internment, deportation, and vast property seizure." So, okay, well, hang on a second. So the act had been used to confiscate the property of interned natives of Germany and more. Interesting. Again, if let's go back to the first hour of this broadcast, and this is a long one, I guess, because we're already at the 90-minute mark. So the immigrants are being enticed to come over. NGOs, 501c3s, wraparound services, and possibly blockchain is going to now control and keep them on a chain and turn them into slaves of the system. But if you look at history went back and said, we're going to now take whatever you've accumulated that gives you dignity, you immigrants. We're going to take it back. So this is crazy. So I don't even have a word to describe that kind of system. It's beyond evil, right? It's totally reprehensible. Apparently all the US public, okay, here's the next sentence. See, I haven't read this before, so every sentence is like a surprise to me. Apparently all the US public was now the enemy. Think about this. People who are simply protecting themselves and their families from the actions of the Federal Reserve System were accused of hoarding gold and literally criminalized if they persisted in doing so. The rationale is incredible. You are hoarding gold, so we will take it and do what with it? Hoard it. As we have seen, once they had taken the gold of the public, they did not then use the resource to expand credit. People remained in a debt trap. The deprivation continued and even worsened. That was real enough. The rationale, however, had been planned. It was a construct. That's a term I used to use a lot, construct. I asked my father why people had turned to their gold. I asked my father why people had turned in their gold. He said that if you did not, you were a criminal. But further, that there was nothing you would be able to do with it because you could not legally transport or sell it. So essentially, the use and value of gold had been confiscated. This was certainly the case because it remained illegal for a U.S. person to own gold for more than 40 years. Here are some excerpts from Executive Order 6102. All persons are hereby required to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933 to a Federal Reserve Bank or branch or agency thereof or to any member bank of the Federal Reserve System all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them or coming into their ownership. Whoever willfully violates any provision of this executive order may be fined not more than $10,000, or if a natural person, may be imprisoned for not more than 10 years or both. Note that the penalties were quite severe and that all the gold was literally to be turned over to the Federal Reserve System. How nice. So if for you people out there who, and we've done it too, we got a donation from an individual, and we took that donation and bought some gold with it. And there's a record of it. We have the receipt, and the person who sold us the gold has the receipt as well. So it's not like we can fake it and say we don't have it. It's not like by sharing it with you, it wouldn't be made public knowledge anyway. So the feds can do whatever they want with it. Oh, we don't care that you spent, a couple $100 on something. You're out a couple $100. Yoink, we're going to take that from you. So that's what was happening. Now we can see the purpose of constructing. In 1923, the largest bank vault in the world and a fortified building. Fortified with ammunition is the implied meaning here. Perhaps gold will not be confiscated immediately this time around. Gold has not been targeted as the essential collateral backing, as was the case under the Federal Reserve Act. In this go-round, it is securities of all kinds globally, which have been set up as the collateral backing underpinning the derivatives complex. It is quite possible that the big banks have suppressed the price of gold by selling paper gold in subsidiaries, which will be allowed to fail, while accumulating physical gold in subsidiaries, which are designed to survive. This, however, does not assure that you, as a member of the great unwashed, will be allowed to keep your gold, not if this juggernaut continues in motion. I recall the words of my father, who had lived through all of this. The only thing they can't take from you is your education. Only the Federal Reserve System was designed to survive and take over all assets and banking activities. Only the Federal Reserve banks and those selected and controlled by the Federal Reserve were allowed to reopen. The Federal Reserve was also indemnified by the government, i.e. the public, for any losses. And so, large-scale closure of banks and taking of bank deposits is not unprecedented. Holders of cash in banks are unsecured creditors with no enforceable claim to their own money. It has been promised that there will be no taxpayer bailout this time, as if that is a good thing. Why? Simply because this will allow the banks to be closed rather than nationalized. Then all deposits and assets will be taken by the protected class of secured creditors. And this is where it's going. Some wealthy people may think they will hide from this by keeping their money with the too big to fail banks. Perhaps it will seem that they have succeeded in this through the early stages of the banking crisis. However, this regime shift is designed to be all-encompassing. The big banks are organized as holding companies with subsidiaries. The purpose of this structure is to legally separate risks. A subsidiary can be designed to take on liabilities which cannot attach to assets in other subsidiaries or to the building company. The weakened subsidiary can be separately bankrupted. Ordinarily, the deposit-taking subsidiaries should be quite secure, but a strategy has been set up so the deposit-taking subsidiaries of the too big to fail banks can be separately bankrupted when the time comes. How can we know that? By the way, do you know anybody that doesn't have a bank account? I'm just curious. Just ask yourself, do you know anyone that doesn't put their money in the bank? Maybe they get cash checks for their paychecks, or or if they do have a bank account, they immediately withdraw it all and keep it under their bed or something. Do you know anybody like that? The Fed has the power to give exemptions to any bank to make derivatives into deposit-taking subsidiaries, and it has done so. It has been tested and on a large scale. Apparently, it is easily and unilaterally done by the Fed by granting exemptions to Section 23A of the Federal Reserve Act. Here are some excerpts from a Bloomberg News article from 2011. Bank of America Corp., hit by a credit downgrade last month, has moved derivatives from its Merrill Lynch unit to a subsidiary flush with insured deposits, according to people with direct knowledge of the situation. The Fed has signaled that it favors moving the derivatives to give relief to the bank holding company. Bank of America's holding company, the parent of both the retail bank and the Merrill Lynch securities unit, held almost $75 trillion of derivatives at the end of June. About $53 trillion, or 71%, were within Bank of America, according to the data, which represent the national values of the trades. That compares with JP Morgan's deposit-taking entity, JP Morgan Chase Bank, which contained 99% of the New York-based firm's $79 trillion of notional derivatives. Notional. Okay, which represent the notional values of the trades. What's notional? I'm going to look it up really quick. Sorry, guys. Notional. Notional. Existing only in theory as a suggestion or idea. Oh, okay. So it's just the notion of something. Oh, I see. Weird. The real or actual? I'm sorry, what is the meaning of the word notional? It means not real or actual, ideal or imaginary, to create a notional world for oneself, given to our foolish or fanciful ideas or moods. So listen to that in the context of the Bank of America. So Bank of America's holding company, the parent of both the retail bank and the Merrill Lynch Securities unit, held almost $75 trillion of derivatives at the end of June, and about $53 trillion, or 71%, were within Bank of America, according to the data, which represent the notional values of the trades. They're not even real, I guess. That compares with JP Morgan's deposit taking entity, JP Morgan Chase Bank, which contained 99% of the New York-based firm's $79 trillion of notional derivatives. Moving derivative contracts between units of a bank holding company is limited under Section 23A of the Federal Reserve Act, which is designed to prevent a lender's affiliates from benefiting from its federal subsidy and to protect the bank from excessive risk originating at the non-bank affiliate, said Saul T. Amarova, a law professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill School of Law. And in 2009, the Fed granted Section 23A exemptions to the banking arms of Ally Financial Inc., HSBC Holdings Place, Fifth Third Bank Corp., ING Group NV, General Electric Company, the Northern Trust Corporation, CIT Group Inc., Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs Group, among others. I'm familiar with the Northern Trust only because I had a very brief stint with them in Chicago years ago. I wasn't an actual employee. I was just contracting there. It was kind of fun, but whatever. And here are excerpts from another article on the same subject. Bank of America has shifted about $22 trillion worth of derivative obligations from Merrill Lynch and the BAC holding company to the FDIC insured retail deposit division. Along with this information came the revelation that the FDIC insured unit was already stuffed with $53 trillion worth of these potentially toxic obligations, making a total of $75 trillion. This all has the blessing of the Federal Reserve, which approved the transfer of derivatives from Merrill Lynch to the insured retail unit of BAC before it was done. This is not an isolated incident. JP Morgan Chase is being allowed to house its unstable derivative obligations within its FDIC-insured retail banking unit, and other big banks do the same. Keep in mind, when you see the scale of the derivative positions in these individual banks, that the size of the entire global economy was about $74 trillion back then in 2011. So individual banks had derivatives books the size of the entire global economy, and they moved them into their deposit-taking subsidiaries with the approval of the Fed. Why has this been tested on such a large scale? It seems they are quite serious about something. Is the intent to make the deposit-taking subsidiaries safer? What is the real purpose? Used at the appropriate time, this will assure the collapse of the deposit-taking subsidiaries of the too-big-to-fail banks, allowing the taking of money comprehensively, including from depositors in these deposit-taking subsidiaries, leaving essentially no money anywhere and no pockets of resilience or of potential resistance. Meanwhile, in the chaos of the ensuing global wave of insolvencies, peppered with contrived existential threats, the protected class of bank holding companies and their subsidiaries designed for continuance will not only survive, but thrive, taking essentially all collateral. This will be put forth as an imperative. This imperative is that they must survive and be strong for the sake of humanity, so that the system might begin again and we all might move forward. People will be desperate and simply want the terror to stop. What fig leaf will depositors have to protect them from the, quote, protected class? The Deposit Insurance Fund, or the DIF of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC, was $128.2 billion as of December 31st, 2022. The FDIC is required to fund the DIF, or the Deposit Insurance Fund, to 1.35% of insurance deposits. So, okay, so if there's a problem, this is me now, not him. I'm interjecting. So we all bank, right? And there's always a little sticker on the front of the bank door that says insured by FDIC. Okay. And we all just assume that our money is safe. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And so what he's saying is that if for whatever reason there's a problem, the FDIC is supposed to provide, like say you have $100 in a bank account and it disappears or it goes away for whatever reason. You are because your bank is insured under the FDIC, 1.35% of that $100, which is, let's see, I'm going to calculate this out. 100 times 1.35%. I should have known this. You're getting $1.35. So for every $100, I think that's how it works. For every $100 you have in the bank, if there's a problem, then the FDIC insures it for $1.35. So if you have, $10,000 in the bank and it just goes bye-bye, then the FDIC insures it for 1.35%. And so that's what you really have. I guess I'm not a banking expert. Don't arrest me. I'm not pretending to be a financial expert. The DIF can be exhausted and indeed has been totally depleted twice in the savings and loan crisis and in the global financial crisis. In these instances, the FDIC was allowed to borrow funds from the Federal Financing Bank. And so the FDIC has a line of credit with the Treasury for up to $100 billion. So the FDIC is just really nothing. It's just basically borrowing money from the Treasury. This is ridiculous. If this credit line were fully utilized, total resources would be $228 billion, roughly 2% of insured deposits. So if the entire banking system is insolvent, this is what I was just figuring out. Insured depositors get 2 cents on the dollar. That's actually more than what I figured out. That will not go far in a widespread banking crisis or if the deposit-taking subsidiary of a major bank is bankrupted. Bank of America and JP Morgan have over $2 trillion and $2.5 trillion in deposits, respectively. In Europe, banking union was initiated in 2012, supposedly as a response to the Eurozone crisis. This has transferred responsibility for banking policy from the national level to the EU level in 21 countries. Sweden has thus far resisted pressure from its own central bank to join the banking union. Denmark and Poland have signed but not yet ratified the treaty. The objective, I believe, was to create a construct, the goal of which is preventing stabilization of banks through nationalization based on the simplistic argument that as the wind down of the banks will be handled entirely privately, no taxpayer funds will be used. Resolution powers over the captured banking systems, including around 3,000 banks and other financial institutions, have been conferred to a resolution authority, the Single Resolution Board, or the SRB, which will execute a single resolution mechanism. A single resolution fund will be used for the exercise of resolution powers. The SRF, or the Single Resolution Fund, is composed of contributions from credit institutions and certain investment firms in the participating member states within the banking union. So do you think, this is me interjecting again, Do you think that the single resolution fund that he's talking about is a, like, what is that called? Where you just get money. I can't think of the term, but it's where the government just gives you a certain amount of money every month, and that's just what you get. I can't think of the actual financial term. Oh well. The SRF must by law reach the target level of at least 1% of covered deposits by December 31st, 2023, at which time, wait, that was just a few months ago, at which time the deposit insurance regime is intended to be fully mutualized among the member states. The SRF, the Single Resolution Fund, is projected to be approximately 80 billion euros at this point. At that point, a revolving credit line from the European Stability Mechanism will match the SRF, stepping up total backing to 2% of covered deposits, approximately 160 billion euro, and thereby reaching harmonization with the level of the 2% backing of deposits in the US. So they're kind of doing the same thing over there, I guess. The SRB is now aiming to capture and incorporate into the SRM the legacy national deposit guarantee schemes. The SRB has a problem with something called super priority. In bankruptcy, super priority claims rank with or even above those of secured creditors. The SRB has stated that the super priority of DGS, or the deposit guarantee schemes, makes it de facto unrealistic to use DGS funds in resolution. So the SRB has further stated that the SRB supports removing the DGS super priority and adopting a general depositor preference. Why do they object to super priority for DGS? Well, these funds are quite small. With super priority, the funds used from national DGS would certainly be recovered from the assets of the bank and thus could be reused. It would give the national DGS a seat at the table alongside the senior secured creditors, potentially involving the state in each resolution process. The SRB absolutely does not want that. They are attempting to force agreement that these funds will be treated as a general depositor preference, which would put any such funds just ahead of unsecured creditors, but behind secured creditors. Practically speaking, this means that the funds would not be recovered and would be wiped out in the first major failure. That seems to be the objective. Super priority is only for the protected class. The public can only be allowed an appearance of protection. Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. I've been reading and talking a lot today. And of course, I bragged about, or I said that his chapters are really short. And this, of course, is the longest chapter. The Single Resolution Board has directed the biggest banks to prepare for solvent wind down. Again, that sounds like a good thing, but given the scale of the bubble, this cannot possibly mean the solvency of the entire banking system. I suggest that what this means is the preparation of certain portions of the biggest banks to remain solvent. Here are some excerpts from the SRB memo, Solvent Wind Down of Trading Books. All globally systematically important books are expected to work on SWD. Thanks. Planning as a RPC, or a resolution planning cycle. Priority. Other banks will be identified and approached in the course of 2022, following a further assessment of the significance of their trading books to work on SWD planning as a RPC 2023 priority. GSIBs, all these terms, globally systemically important banks, are GSIBs, and are expected to prepare to plan and ensure that capabilities are ready to deliver day one expectations in 2022, while other banks approached in 2022 are expected to deliver on these in 2023. Banks should take all the necessary steps to ensure that all day one SWD-related expectations are implemented on time. Here are further excerpts from the SRB's work program of 2023. The SRBs 2023. Okay, so remember, SRB means SRB, Single Resolution Board. So the Single Resolution Board is talking about this solvent wind down. So here are further explanations of that. So it's set against a backdrop of great uncertainty. While the start of 2022 saw economies beginning to emerge from the pandemic, 2023 will see added challenges, in part stemming from Russian aggression in Ukraine. And what have we learned from Mike Benz today? What's really going on? It's not a war, you guys. You guys know that, right? It's not a war. What's going on in Ukraine and Russia? You should follow Mike Benz. It's a CIA op. It really is, and it's about who wants the gas, who wants the gas station, as Scott Adams put it. Do we want Ukraine to have it or Russia? It's really, and of course, Hunter Biden is thrown in there and benefits from all of it. While the start of 2022 saw economies beginning to emerge from the pandemic, 2023 will see added challenges because of the CIA aggression in Ukraine and Russia. I added that part. Rising energy costs have led to double-digit inflation in many parts of the banking union. Now more than ever, it is important we finalize the work on banking resolvability and ensure that all of the goals set out in the SRB's expectation for banks are met before the year is out. This was the initial target date, and we are on track to meet it. The coming 12 months will see the SRB's focus moving from the more general phases of drafting and fine-tuning of resolution plans toward ensuring that each plan and preferred resolution strategy for each bank is implementable at short notice. At the same time, crisis preparedness needs to be further strengthened to equip the SRB with all tools needed to react to a looming crisis, implement a resolution scheme, and manage any necessary restructuring of the bank. It's clear that more harmonized European measures are the way forward rather than renationalizing and weakening European financial stability tools. Nevertheless, there will always be losses when a bank gets into trouble. Resolution is not a miracle fix-all solution. Rather, it is about attributing and sharing the losses a bank suffers. The year 2023 will be the last of a transitional period for the establishment of the main elements of the resolution framework in the banking union. It seems that we are getting very close to showtime. I believe that this book was published in November of last year, maybe. Was it November of 2023? So an indication of the extreme seriousness of the powers that be can be seen in the SRB press release from 2022. Principals of U.S., European Banking Union, and UK financial authorities meet for regular coordination exercise on cross-border resolution planning. Oh, another event 201, but for the financial sector. The heads of resolution, regulatory, and supervisory authorities, central banks, and finance ministries of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Banking Union are among leading participants in a trilateral principal level exercise on Saturday, April 23rd, 2022. The meeting is part of a series of regular exercises and exchanges among the principals of these key financial sector authorities to enhance understanding of each jurisdiction's resolution regime for global systemically important banks and to strengthen coordination on cross-border resolution. This exercise builds on 6 prior cross-border principal-level events going back to 2014, with the European Banking Union authorities joining in 2016. From the U.S., the participants are expected to include the Secretary of the Treasury. Okay, Secretary of the Treasury is Steve Mnuchin. He used to run a bank in California. I forget what it was called. And he defrauded all of the depositors of that. This is me, by the way. He defrauded all the depositors of that bank. It was not too big to fail. It failed. And there were lawsuits against him personally. And the Attorney General of California was basically pressured to move forward with the lawsuits against Steve Mnuchin, who is the current Secretary of the Treasury, I believe. At least he was during the Trump administration. But she lost the paperwork. I can't find the paperwork for all the lawsuits that are filed against this individual who defrauded hundreds of thousands of Americans or California residents who had their money in this particular bank. Who was the Attorney General? Anybody want to take a guess who the Attorney General of California was at that time? Anyone? It was Kamala Harris. Okay, back to the book. The exercise builds on 6 prior cross-border principal level events going back to 2014, with the European Banking Union authorities joining in 2016. First, from the U.S., the participants are expected to include the Secretary of the Treasury, the Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, the President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the Acting Chairman of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Acting Comptroller of the Currency, the Chairman of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Participants from the European Banking Union include principals from the Single Resolution Board, the European Commission, and the European Central Bank. Participants from the United Kingdom include principals from HM Treasury and the Bank of England. This level of attention from the U.S. side is extremely unusual. I have never seen anything like this happen, let alone 7 times in 8 years. It's almost as if they are planning something quite serious. The Atlantic Council is a think tank, which creates a meeting place for heads of state, military, and institutional leaders. It is a member of the Atlantic Treaty Association, an umbrella organization which draws together political leaders, academics, military officials, and diplomats to support the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. The focus of the Atlantic Council is military strategy, not economics. So, what is the Atlantic Council focusing on now? Central bank digital currency, or CBDC, which is virtual money backed and issued directly by central banks. The Atlantic Council has quite a nice CBDC tracker. Here, one can see that, as of this writing, central banks in 114 countries, representing 95% of the global economy, are working on CBDC, and that 11 countries have fully launched digital currency, that all G7 economies have now moved into the development stage of CBDC, and that 18 of the G20 countries are now in the advanced stage of development. Why is this happening now, globally? Is it really a desire to bring financial inclusion to the disadvantaged? Why would the Atlantic Council, a military strategy think tank, focus on CBDC? Well, why do you think, Mr. Webb? Why was the military involved in the deployment of alleged vaccines? This is me talking. On the population, with a specific target of the American population. We are living within a global hybrid war, a component of which will be the collapse of the banking, money, and payment systems globally. War aims will be achieved by means other than kinetic war. Do you guys know what kinetic war is? This is a really long broadcast, and if you're still with me, you're amazing. Kinetic war. In U.S. military parlance, the term kinetic generally refers to missiles or other traditional types of weapon systems that physically engage targets, whereas non-kinetic tools can include cyber, electronic warfare, and other means of attack. So, continuing. This chapter is almost over. It's like one more page. So the Atlantic Council has quite a nice CBDC tracker. So why is this happening now globally? Is it really a desire to bring financial inclusion to the disadvantaged? And why would the Atlantic Council, a military strategy think tank, focus on CBDCs? So we're now living within a global hybrid war, a component of which will be the collapse of the banking, money, and payment systems globally. War aims will be achieved by means other than kinetic war. So no bombs will be dropped on your house. The foremost aim of the people who have privately controlled the central banks and money creation is that they will remain in power forever. They can risk no pockets of resistance. You know who else is in power forever? President Xi of China. Augustin Carstens, oh God, this guy. Seriously, you guys all know about Augustin Carstens, is the general manager of the Bank for International Settlements, and one can see the following comments of his, which have gone viral just after the 24-minute mark in the video of the virtual meeting titled Cross-Border Payments, A Vision for the Future. So since his fat face and fat body has, gone viral all over social media, people are making fun of him relentlessly. It's really funny. And he says, we don't know who's using a $100 bill today. Sorry. We don't know who's using a $100 bill today, and we don't know who's using a 1,000 peso bill today. The key difference with the CBDC is the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. So in other words, CBDC means absolute control. And so if the old money system somehow collapses, new money will be provided by the central banks in the form of central bank digital currency, or a CBDC, the new and improved control system. Imagine. It's chaos. You've lost everything but your smartphone. And if you don't have one, don't worry. You will be issued one. You will download an app. You will click boxes agreeing to everything. You will become increasingly indebted with each payment you make using the CBDC you are given on your phone. And you will be told what to do and what not to do from then on. And you will comply if you want to eat. And thus ends chapter 8. Finally, I'm really glad that we began this 2-hour broadcast, and that we took the first hour to talk about the immigration policy. I think that everything that he says, and I think that everything that blockchain is about, and I think that everything that people are worried about happening to them is actually going to be tested out on the immigrants first. I actually think it's going to be tested out on migrants. That's going to be the control group, so to speak, the ones that they run the experiments on. And there may be certain individuals who are, influential on social media, who eventually, years and years and years down the road, may transfer into the CBDC, and they will be there to influence all of us and you to do it yourselves. And they'll say, it's great, it's wonderful, it's, it's totally secure and safe, and it's, it's immune to collapse, like this horrible fiat, currency that we've been living on for, since the beginning of time, and they will influence regular people like me and you that it's a good thing. So watch out for tricks and tactics to emotionally manipulate you about the financial system. I'm not saying that this book is that, not at all. I'm saying that this person has an inside view and an inside scope of what's happening. This last paragraph, or this last statement in chapter 8, I think will be applied towards the migrant population first, because it's the easiest to do. They're easier to track than we are. They are easier to they need the wraparound services. We don't. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's going to be tried out with them first, and then they'll, maybe expand it out into, the working population, maybe. So, but it's still a long time coming. So chapter 9, which I'll pick up next week, It's called The Great Deflation, and he begins with a quote entitled, "Wisdom comes alone through suffering." Now, I want to tell you why this is so interesting that he uses that quote for this chapter. Jensen Huang is the owner of, or the CEO of NVIDIA. NVIDIA is the company that uses the chips that are needed to run AI. And he is recently among the population that is invested in AI, among economists, among people who are VCs, venture capitalists, especially like in the Bay Area. His recent quote is trending among this population of people, and they're really interested in it. And there's a couple of different reasons why this quote has come out. And it's interesting that David Webb, who published this book, a long time ago, like, probably started writing it probably about a year ago, I guess. And then I think it was published in November of last year, that he uses this particular quote: "Wisdom comes alone through suffering." I want to share the screen of Jensen Huang's quote recently. Can you see that? The founder and CEO of NVIDIA, the AI chip company that's on a rocket ride, last week offered a sadistic wish while speaking to Stanford students. Okay, "I hope suffering happens to you, because without pain and suffering, there's no resilience," he argued. "And without resilience, there's no greatness." So imagine, you're the most privileged person in American society. You're attending Stanford. You've never, ever, ever felt the pain and suffering of being poor, of having to be on food stamps, you've always had everything handed to you, and your parents are paying for this really expensive education at this beautiful school. And the CEO and founder of one of the most successful companies right now tells you, "I hope you suffer." Can you imagine that? I love it. So the reason he said that is there's a couple of things happening. I think that the pool of individuals that are applying for jobs in these kinds of sectors, whether it's, some kind of startup that has some gimmicky idea and they need programmers or engineers, or marketing people, or whether it's, wanting to work for NVIDIA or Google, some of these bigger, huge, names. I think the pool of talent is greatly diminished. And I think these CEOs and these VCs and venture capitalists and original founders of Facebooks and places like that, who have gone on to create new companies and are doing new things, I think they're seeing that like in very real world ways. They're like, nobody knows how to do anything. Like these students, at Stanford, they're being churned out, but they don't know how to do anything. They've never really had to go through life to learn how to survive. So there's something going on in the workforce in this field too. And I think it's, and that kind of sort of ties in with this weird, financial restructuring that David Webb talks about in his book. But I thought that it was really interesting that he uses that quote for chapter 9. Again, "Wisdom comes alone through suffering." And Jensen Huang recently spoke to Stanford students saying, "I hope you suffer, because without pain and suffering, there is no resilience. And without resilience, there's no greatness." So I'm going to end this broadcast by saying that social media ameliorates your pain. So you have to suffer. You have to go through pain. JP and I had to go through an immense amount of pain and humiliation when we had to leave San Francisco and then move to the ghetto. We had to do it in order to get to the place where we are now. If we had just sat around on social media and complained all day about San Francisco and then never did anything, we would have never really gone through the process, learned what we learned, and then emerged as something different and better than we were before. And I think that that's what's happening with a lot of these CEOs and these venture capitalists is they're seeing that the younger population, it's not that they don't want to work, it's that social media like TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, social media is basically killing their drive. It's like being a drug addict. You're addicted to drugs. That's why so many people who have, a history of alcoholism or a history of drug addiction have just replaced that addiction with social media. And it's not, whatever. And this isn't about addicts. This is about just realizing that your potential is being purposefully wedged out of you. And now people like Jensen Huang, who is the founder and CEO of NVIDIA, which is an AI chip company, NVIDIA being one of the most successful companies in existence right now, is recognizing that. And he's become cynical towards the younger population and towards the new pool of talent that he has to choose from to bring into his organization. And all of these capitalists they're like, what is wrong with people now? Well, it's the very things that you create that are causing, brains to not work at their full potential, So it's really, really interesting how you can't look at this financial collapse. You can't look at this lack of talent in the pool of potential workers that are entering into the market and all of it without looking at the emotional consequences and the psychological consequences and the mental consequences of social media and AI and TikTok and Facebook and all these things that were created that back in the early 2000s, they said out of their own mouths, it was Sean Parker and Shamath Palihapitiya, who are, investors and founders of Facebook, who stood in front of panels of hundreds or thousands of people and said, and I quote, "We are eroding the fabric of society by creating these platforms, but we're doing it anyway because there's lots of money there, because it's government backed, because it's a way to track everybody's thoughts and thought processes. And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for people like me to see everybody sharing every little bit about themselves. There is one last point I want to make, and it's about Peter Breggin. Peter Breggin is the psychologist who basically ended lobotomies as we know them. And everybody celebrates him for that, and I do too, obviously. He's the one who stood up against Robert Malone and said, no, this isn't mass formation psychosis. This is a military event. And when you have the potential for your American citizens to be reacting to something which could be construed as at the butt of a gun, where they have no choice, that's not mass formation psychosis. That is survival. They are going to do what they have to do to survive. Well, there is another aspect and opinion of Peter Breggin that nobody talks about, which has been enormously helpful to me in understanding why I have so much, why I am so repulsed by social media. Years ago, he gave a very just eloquent and amazing statement for a girl who was on trial. And she was on trial, a teenage girl was on trial for the fact that a boy that she had met one time in person, one time. And then after that, their relationship was nothing except through text messages, social media, messaging through like Facebook Messenger. And for like a whole year or so, he was just going on and on and on about his troubled life. And he was imposing on her all of these really intense feelings he had, these deep feelings of turmoil and unrest that he was having. And he was treating her as if she was a clinical psychiatrist, that she was credentialed enough to take on that amount of stress and that amount of pressure from him. And he would dump on her. And she's just a 16-year-old girl at this point. She's just like, I just want to paint my fingernails and, go hang out with my friends and go to school and, go to pep rallies and go to the movies and skate and go on vacations and swim. I mean, she is not equipped to handle this amount of inner turmoil that he was experiencing. And then he was just dumping it on her. So he ended up committing suicide, and the courts ended up blaming her for his suicide. And so there's enter Peter Breggin that was like, whoa, hold on a minute. She is not credentialed to be the thing that he had assumed that she could be. It's not her responsibility to take care of this troubled young man. Now, maybe she should have, said to somebody in an adult, capacity or whatever, you know what, there's this person, he's clearly unstable, he's clearly upset about life, you're going to have to take over. Like, maybe she could have done that, but I don't know. Do 16-year-old girls really do that? I mean, women, especially even adult women, the pressure to save the world is put on them, without anyone actually coming out and saying, you need to do this. Women in general are the nurturers. They take on a lot of the frustrations of society and try to help people. I've unfortunately been in that position many times where I've tried to save people who are not savable, who can't be saved. So social media, it feels like every time there's this long drawn out, whether it's a Facebook post or an Instagram post or even a Twitter thread where people just go on and on and on about, their personal life and their accomplishments or tragedies. I'm sitting over here feeling increasingly uncomfortable and nauseous because I feel like I'm now, as the viewer or the engager or the user, being put in a position where, like, I have to become something I'm not, and I don't even know these people. These people are complete strangers to me. So, and I think that social media has somehow warped it so that we've become this like society where we have to tell on each other and we have to tell each other's, secrets, and then we have to tattle on each other and then block people and make all these really dumb moves that none of us did when we were growing up. I mean, it's just become this really inverted type of existence that just seems really ugly to me. So that's the last point I want to make. It was really important that I say this. And when I mentioned it to JP, he's like, wow, that's really kind of profound. And thank you for sharing that. And maybe you can squeeze it into your weekly broadcast. It just felt really important. So circling back to this idea that wisdom comes alone through suffering, and something that Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, also said, and who reflects the position that a lot of CEOs of these companies are thinking right now. It's like, none of these kids have really suffered, and they expect us to give them a job. They haven't gone through the meat grinder at all of life. They're just living on TikTok or living on Facebook because they're too afraid of getting hurt. I lived in a community where we couldn't even get a cat sitter for free because the neighborhood was so bad. It was so repulsive, and I don't think anybody listening has ever lived in those kinds of conditions. And so, I'm just wondering how much people really are willing to suffer to get through to that point where they can emerge as something better. But tune in next week for The Great Deflation, Chapter 9. Wisdom comes alone through suffering. All right, you guys, you've been amazing for staying with me this long. It's been 2.5 hours. And you're right, Brooke. How do I know? So I don't know. I don't know anybody. You know what I'm saying? I've never met anybody who listens. There's only one person I've met, one or two people I've met who listen, and they're old friends that go way back. But people have a lot of pride. I told you about my homeless friend who thinks it's okay to dump on me or to dump on another mutual friend of ours, but his family, who has millions of dollars, doesn't even know he's homeless. But why does he put the pressure on us? People are proud. People don't want to admit, So, and they don't want to get out of their bad situation because they would have to admit that they're in the bad situation. People are very proud. And it was difficult for us to leave San Francisco and then move basically to what, our current neighbor calls the ghetto. It was difficult for us to admit that we had to do that. But I'm starting to see that it was one of the best things we could have ever done, believe it or not, because we got through it. And we weren't really even planning on getting through it. We were like, okay, well, I guess this is our lot in life, is to stay here. But everything about us was just uncomfortable there. Like, we knew that we deserved better. And that's just it. Has the economy and has the American way of life and has the CIA and all of its stupid psyops that it imposes on all of us, and has social media convinced us all that we're not allowed to live better lives? Anyway, I didn't mean for me to get on my soapbox. This is supposed to be a reading of The Great Taking by David Webb. And it's been immensely helpful and illuminating. So please tune in next week for Chapter 9. And I promise it will go a lot shorter. This is only a full 4-page chapter. And whatever we introduce at the beginning of the broadcast will also be a lot shorter. But we just felt that the whole immigrant situation needed some exposure. People were starting to go places that made me feel uncomfortable on social media. So I wanted to rein it back in and show people what it's really about. And I so appreciate all your comments. And your yes, Brooke, thank you so much. You mentioned universal basic income, right? When I was trying when I was reading David Webb's passage about something called SRFs, I was like, wait, that sounds a little bit like the money you get every month from the government. What's it called? Right. It's universal basic income. Right. All right. Well, thank you for that. See, I learned something from you guys as well. All right. I'll speak to you next week. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Bye.